Thank you. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're holding a hearing on legislation to short-circuit an ongoing decision-making process and pressure the Department of State into approving a massive new oil pipeline called Keystone XL, which would carry a sludge made from tar sands through the middle of America. This project would raise gas prices, endanger water supplies, and increase carbon emissions. What's good for oil companies is not always good for America, and that's especially true of this proposal.
Over the heartland of America lies one of the country's most fertile agricultural regions, the Ogallala Aquifer and the Sand Hills of Nebraska. Since the 1930s, this area of the country has been homesteaded and farmed by generations of landowners who today continue to cultivate and harvest the land. Home to the largest underground aquifer in the country, the Ogallala provides drinking water to 2 million people. The Sand Hills, which lie atop the Ogallala, is also the largest wetland region in the United States. It has taken generations to cultivate and is now a multi-billion-dollar cattle ranching area, supporting over 500,000 beef cattle. But since 2008, this vast area has been under threat. This is the story of a fight to protect America's heartland. Retired Army pilot Cornelius Murphy has been a farmer and landowner in this area all of his 76 years.
Now it's coming right through here. Right here is where the pumping station's gonna be. Now you see that telephone pole? That's the crossing they put in for the pumping station.
When they came to Nebraska, they came to landowners and they said, okay, we want to buy easements on your property. But the way that they presented it has been, we will get an easement, we will run a pipeline through your property, and it's just a matter of whether we can agree on a figure, or if we don't, then we're going to take you to court, we're going to use eminent domain.
We have artesian wells here flowing right in this area where you don't have to put a windmill down, you just put a pipe in the ground, the water flows out of it. This is just like a diamond in the world, this Ogallala Aquifer. It isn't just Nebraska, it isn't just the United States. It's we've got a clean lake down there, a big lake, and it's always been there, and it's gonna always be there. You know, a lot of people take it for granted. Until you take something away, a lot of people, I don't think they realize how lucky we are.
I honestly thought, as a United States citizen, we had rights. That was probably the hardest thing of this whole thing, is to find out some company from Canada can come in and say, you know what, you don't have any rights, we have more rights. We found out they do have.
Since the 1860s, an intricate system of pipelines has grown to pump oil and gas across America. Today, these steel arteries stretch for tens of thousands of miles, providing the fuel for America's increasing fossil fuel addiction. The latest major pipeline proposal would pump an additional 700,000 barrels of oil a day from Canada, more than doubling the amount currently flowing south into the U.S. Phase 1 of the Keystone Pipeline system currently ships oil from Canada to the Midwest. It was approved with very little public scrutiny under the George W. Bush administration. The multi-billion-dollar pipeline company TransCanada has spent 3 years seeking U.S. approval for a new $7 billion pipeline known as the Keystone XL, which would ship heavy crude oil from Hardisty, Alberta, to a growing market of refineries along the Texas Gulf Coast. Approval of the pipeline seemed like a sure bet, until BP's disastrous Gulf of Mexico spill in the spring of 2010 exposed the public to the heavy risks of oil and gas projects. Because Keystone XL will cross an international border, the U.S. State Department is tasked with making a decision. Final approval requires a presidential permit, and the Canadian government and big oil lobbyists have been spending millions of dollars in Washington to fight what has become the biggest environmental battle in the U.S. today. At the heart of this battle is Nebraska, the state where the pipeline route poses the greatest environmental risks.
Here's the way I explain it. If you look at a map, it certainly appears that it was just a ruler laid to a map to draw a straight line between point A and point B. Straight line being the least amount of pipeline, maximizing the amount of profit for TransCanada. And in fact, it's passing through a fragile area of our topography, the Sand Hills, and it's passing over the Ogallala Aquifer, which is one of the largest freshwater bodies of water on the planet. What's more, it's affecting Nebraska landowners. There are many who don't favor this type of oil or this pipeline project at all, but there are also many who don't favor the path. When indeed there is another pipeline operated by the exact same company, pushing the same material that does not do this as egregiously, passes through the eastern third of our state. I think it would save them an enormous public relations battle if they would simply use the existing pipeline route.
Frankly, I think one of the reasons they want to run it through Nebraska and want to run it through the Sand Hills is it's relatively sparsely populated, and they think, well, if there's not very many people there, then we can just run roughshod over the local people, and it won't matter because, you know, so what if there's a few people in Nebraska that are upset? What does that matter to people in New York or California?
Across Nebraska, agents hired by TransCanada have been acquiring easement and land rights across the pipeline path. Terry Taylor, owner of a large family-operated Sand Hills ranch, belongs to a group of ranchers who are fighting a modern-day David and Goliath battle to protect their land.
Okay, these are maps that show where the proposed pipeline will be crossing our property. We have 3 different properties in 3 different counties where the pipeline actually goes through. We call, where we're at right now, this is what we call our home place. It's been in our family for going on with the onset of our new grandson. It will be 6 generations. And the pipeline crosses somewhere around a little over 3 miles. We actually just received these maps within the last probably 4 months. Up until then, we had no idea where exactly the route was, except for a map that I had seen at an open house that TransCanada hosted in Atkinson, Nebraska in the fall of, I think, 2008, so that we could go and actually see where our property was being affected. Up until that time, many landowners had no idea. That was the first inkling they had, and they had long tables set up through the room there with maps, and people were literally swarming on those maps to try to get an idea of how they were being affected, where they were being affected. One question, as a matter of fact, I said, well, what if we don't want this pipeline on our property? What if we feel it isn't the right thing for our property? And very cautiously, he said, well, unfortunately, then we would have to resort to using eminent domain. And so at the first meeting that we attended, that phrase came to be. And I think that has been the biggest fear through all this process, is that we know we really don't have a choice.
Eminent domain is a procedure where usually it's only used by government entities. Like if they're going to put in a road or they've got a sewer system they need to run, then they will use eminent domain to take property, but it has to be done for a public purpose. And first of all, we don't think they have the authority to use it. And secondly, we don't think there's any kind of a public purpose that's being served because it's solely for their own private profit.
We're looking northwest across our ranch property here on some of the rolling Sand Hills pastures. We can actually see for about 7 miles, and pretty much you're staying within the pipeline right away. What you can't see is the Niobrara River, which is between here and there, down in the river valley where the pipeline also crosses. We're walking probably as close to what I can predict is a pipeline route, just kind of by going off our maps and off what we have been told. It's the rolling Sand Hills pasture here. And as we drop down in the lower ground here, I know there'll be areas where the water is, at the present time, is on top of the ground. And at the present time, we're coming out of a season where we've had abundance of rain. And so we've got a lot of standing water. It's a problem to us right now, and I can't imagine but what it isn't going to be a much greater problem to a pipeline company that comes in and tries to dig a trench. There's just a lot of unknowns about this pipeline and the problems that can be created.
The oil that would be pumped across Terry's land comes from deep below the vast boreal forest of northern Alberta. Carved out of this wilderness is one of the largest industrial projects on the planet, known as the tar sands.
What most Americans don't know is that Canada has been the #1 supplier of oil to the United States. We've replaced Saudi Arabia. We are the new Saudi Arabia. They don't know that a forest the size of Florida will be industrialized by this operation. They have no idea that it will be coming from some of the world's largest open-pit mines. They have no idea that it's coming from operations that are creating 3 times more carbon emissions than conventional oil. And although a lot of Americans would find it comforting to know that they're no longer dependent on hostile suppliers of oil from the Middle East, they don't know really that a sacrifice zone has been created for the United States, so the United States will have some degree of oil security for the next 10 years.
Since the 1950s, the oil industry has been exploiting this vast resource, but only recently has new technology allowed the oil to be profitably extracted. To remove the thick, raw oil, called bitumen, from the sand, it is either mined or heated using enormous amounts of natural gas and consumes 4 gallons of water for every gallon of crude oil produced. In the process, the industry has created over 50 square miles of toxic tailing ponds, a toxic lake so large that it can be seen from outer space. That contain a mixture of water, sand, clay, contaminants, and hydrocarbons dangerous to human health. Tar sand production is the fastest growing source of global warming pollution in Canada, earning its reputation around the world as dirty oil.
Now, there's no question in the mining operations of the oil sands, there are tailings ponds, like there are in all mining operations. There are higher than we would like to see emissions. And those are the kinds of things that are being attacked as dirty oil. And that's why we have worked hard in Canada to look at a number of initiatives to deal with emissions. I don't think there's a jurisdiction on the globe that is doing as much about emissions as Alberta is. But I think the reality of it is that certainly for our lifetime, we're going to see a continued reliance on fossil fuels. And so the United States has to make a decision on whether they are comfortable in bringing in oil from countries that in many cases are their enemies, or increase the supply from Canada. And that's the choice the Americans, I think, have in front of them.
In the United States, we've been taking product from the tar sands in Canada for a while. But what's the new development, what's started happening more recently, just in the last few years, is taking the raw diluted bitumen, the raw tar sands oil, into our pipeline systems. And that's something that we really don't have a lot of experience with in the U.S.
Tar sludge pipelines aren't like normal conventional oil pipelines. Tar sludge is particularly corrosive. They have to dilute it and pressurize it just to squeeze it through a pipeline. And because it's so corrosive and acidic, it has an atrocious safety record. Basically, what we're looking at here is the next oil disaster in the making.
A Calhoun County river rushing with a sheen of oil tonight. It came from a pump station in Marshall Township after a leak sprung there earlier today.
There is oil in the Kalamazoo River, not only a sheen on the surface, but you can also see vegetation and plants along the banks have been stained with that oil. We can see that that's stopping some of the oil, but some of that oil is still seeping underneath the barrier from what we can tell. We know at least one home has been evacuated.
The Canada geese are a pitiful sight, staggering under the weight of oil, and they've become a symbol of the latest environmental disaster.
The last thing any of us want to see is a smaller version of what has happened in the Gulf.
In July 2010, an estimated 1 million gallons of tar sands oil burst from a pipeline operated by another Canadian company, Enbridge.
EPA has the responsibility to clean up the pollution, and it turns out that over half the residents in that area had ended up with health problems. Thousands of wildlife died as a result of coming in contact with this particularly toxic tar sludge.
First, the company denied it was tar sands oil, and then it became clear that there wasn't really a plan in place for how to deal with tar sands oil.
The Enbridge spill was certainly unfortunate, but there's a way to clean up oil, and from everything I understand in Michigan, it's gone very well.
There's still significant submerged oil that's spread along the 35-mile of the river system that was impacted by the initial spill. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go until we're done.
The person in charge for EPA of the cleanup has said that this particular type of oil, because it's the tar sludge, is much harder to clean up than conventional oil. Conventional oil tends to rise to the surface. That's why you have skimmers and absorbents. This sinks to the bottom.
I would never have expected, coming into a large oil spill cleanup, that at this point we would have spent 60 or 70% of our time on the submerged oil than we had on the surface oil.
Sinking to the bottom is news to me. There's a way to clean up oil, and you can drag out all the red herrings you want, but it's oil.
Susan Luby runs a farm northwest of Stewart, Nebraska, where she has lived since she was 6 months old. With the help of her stepdaughter, Alora, they raise 900 head of cattle every year.
My cat. He's such a ham. Wish we had a whole bunch of them to get all the mice around here. Ouch. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on, baby.
The oil spill in Michigan weighs heavy on this area.
I believe after doing research, it's truly something to worry about. This is just what I've read on the internet, how they've handled the situation, how they've had to file bankruptcy and leave their houses because they can't clean it up, because they don't want to drink the water that's there. And I just relate those incidences to what could happen here. And who's going to want to buy beef that is tainted with these chemicals? And this is huge beef country and huge hay country. You know, is the grass tainted to feed to the animals? It just kind of works in a big circle of life. It may seem like we're worrying too much, but we always have to be prepared, because you just can't walk out and look at 900 head of cattle and say, I'm sorry, I can't water you today. Why? It's not going to fly with them. They love this expensive corn. Be like you and the ice cream truck coming by. So they get used to you coming with the... Sometimes they meet you at the gate and it's hard to get through the gate. The pipeline will come right alongside those trees, and then they'll come from there right across here, across all this water, on off to the east through all those cattle.
Susan has been one of the most outspoken critics of the Keystone XL in her county. On May 12, 2011, she took her concerns to the Nebraska state capitol.
They had hearings on the legislation bills, the 3 pipeline bills they're introducing, and half the room was full of landowners and people voicing concerns about the pipeline. And I got to give my testimony of what has happened, the threats of what the land agents have done to us and how we don't want them here.
My father, mother, and I have been harassed by TransCanada and their land agents.
Helicopters have flown over and spooked our cattle through fences. We've had numerous phone calls and visits threatening eminent domain and court proceedings, and a final draft statement sent by FedEx on April 7th has left us drained emotionally about our future of ranching and protecting our land and water.
On April 7th, this is the FedEx package that brought our condemnation letter to us, stating that we had 30 days to sign. If we were in non-compliance, they would take us to court for eminent domain.
I'm truly scared of the thought of any possible leak on the Sand Hills region and our ranch. How would we even clean up the cancer-causing agents that are mixed with the water in these tar sands? How could we raise clean beef cattle on this ground? There has been so many leaks. As a businesswoman of rarity in the Sand Hills, I would not allow my children or any hired help near a contaminated site. I am now asking you to help us in case life doesn't go my way. Please use your power and help protect the sand, our water, and our livelihood of the people of Nebraska by passing this liability bill LB 629 onto the floor.
Originally, LB 629 would have held TransCanada liable for economic and other damages if a pipeline leaks. The bill eventually passed, but with pressure from TransCanada, liability protection was stripped away, leaving TransCanada responsible only for land restoration.
This is a parcel of land in Holt County, Nebraska, where the first pumping station is slated to go. It's pretty low, and as you can obviously see, there's a stream running through here. Pretty incredible. You can actually see the aquifer on the ground. It's running everywhere, and it's incredible that they would actually put that here.
Clean drinking water. Best there is. This well is approximately, I'm going to say 60 feet. It's been here probably 30 plus years. If we have a leak here across my pasture and this tar sands oil gets in the aquifer, which is a shallow aquifer, it will contaminate this water source. If this water source is contaminated, TransCanada has told me that they will haul water to these cattle in this pasture for as long as they need to do it. Now, I don't know whether that's forever or whether that's whenever they get tired or if they drill me another well. When I asked the land agent for TransCanada exactly where this pipeline is going to lay, his comment was, well, you sign your easement, then we'll come out here and we'll show you exactly where it's laying at. When you sign your easement, everything else after that point becomes a moot point. They don't care. Their goal is to have you sign the easement, no matter what it takes.
The first phase of the Keystone Pipeline began in 2008 and was completed in 2010. It stretched nearly 2,000 miles and crossed 7 states.
In my wildest dreams, I never dreamed anything like that would come through here. I mean, we live kind of like in the middle of nowhere, and who would have ever thought, you know, I mean.
We didn't even have a right to negotiate, not even a right to negotiate. They could just come and take it. They didn't have to negotiate, and they did not negotiate with anybody on it.
TransCanada people came in, frontline people, to give a little talk, and one gal at this meeting, a Canadian with TransCanada, said, if there is a spill, and there never will be one, but when there is a spill, when we get through cleaning up and doing what we have to do, your land will be better than it was before the spill. And everybody in the crowd groaned at that point.
They told us it would be better when they were done doing it than it was before. We would complain about roads. They would do absolutely nothing about them. This is what our roads were like. You couldn't drive on them. This was almost 3 feet deep. in the middle of a county road. It's never been fixed. Right now, when we hauled cattle today, we had to go around about 20 miles to get, which would have been a lot shorter if we could have went across, but we couldn't do it.
Have you complained about it?
Oh, we've complained so many times. People hate to see us. We complain so much.
In 2009, we partnered up with TransCanada to construct Keystone, the first Keystone line, which is Keystone 1. And we train our folks here in every aspect of construction, from the environmental impact aspect of it to building the right-of-ways to removing trees. We also move the pipe, we set the pipe, we unload the pipe. And then you have other trades that come in that weld the pipe together. We then coat the pipe, and we do all the reclamation work for the pipeline. Within the proposed Keystone XL pipeline, you're looking at approximately 13,000 construction jobs within the United States. This is something that I think America needs right now. I understand the concerns about the safety. I've heard from some environmental groups that this is going to taint the aquifer. We're going to be drinking oil water. The dire straits type of examples. But with the technology with pipelines and pump stations, which are along the route, the technology they use to detect leaks, I have faith in that. I think once this pipeline's built, in a year after it's built, 2 years after it's built, people are going to forget all about it.
They promised us that there would never be a leak that they didn't know about before we knew about. And a gentleman named Bob Banderette went to check his cattle, I believe, and he saw it shooting into the air. He called the headquarters and they said, no, it's not leaking.
I was coming out of our house at about 6:15 in the morning and just looked up the pumping station, and there's a geyser of oil shooting about 60 feet in the air.
It's fortunate that someone even saw the gusher. The pumping station here is located in a sparsely populated area of the county.
It was coming out of those white tubes there. It was higher than these trees. I'm estimating it was about the same height as that communication tower there. It was thick enough to be able to see from 1.5 miles away. That's how far away our ranch is. And the thought in the back of my mind was, they said that this wasn't going to happen, and here it is.
After calling the oil company's emergency number, Bob had to wonder.
The first lady that answered the phone took all the information. The last question she answered was, is this a drill or is this a joke? And
then she said, I'll connect you with the Operation Control Center. Unfortunately, they didn't pick up the phone for about 4 minutes, and I'm not quite sure why. We heard the pump shut off. We could hear that from our house. Unfortunately, the oil kept shooting up in the air for about another 12 or 13 minutes after that. Most of it fell back down into the containment area that they have there, but some of it drifted off to the southwest out into those cattails. So some of this dirt out here did get contaminated, and some did get into the water. They say they first noticed an imbalance in their pressure readings. If we go by that and say that that was when the leak started, there was probably oil gushing for almost 50 minutes.
Special trucks were brought in to help in the cleanup today. A crew of 24 working to suck up oil that had spilled onto rocks and gravel near the pumping station. TransCanada told us a valve fitting failed.
If that morning had been a day like today, possibly half of that oil could have been outside the perimeter into the water rather than contained like it was.
According to the Department of Transportation's final analysis, the leak was detected by Bob Banderette, not TransCanada's state-of-the-art leak detection system.
TransCanada likes to claim that if they build a new pipeline, it'll be basically fail-safe. They won't have any problems, they can respond in an instant. But they built a pipeline only 1 year ago, and that pipeline's already had 12 spills. And they claim that the new technology will prevent spills. The record shows absolutely the opposite.
In July of 2011, an independent researcher released his own study on Keystone XL, refuting TransCanada's safety projections with the State Department.
They expect 11 significant spills from the pipeline across the 50-year design life. I think a more appropriate number would be like 90.
his further research claims that even one of those spills could release up to 150,000 barrels of oil.
There are things in there like benzene and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and light fraction oil constituents, hydrogen sulfide. There's a bunch of toxic constituents in there. Some of them are carcinogenic. And my calculations, in a river like the Yellowstone or like the Missouri River would form a benzene plume, for example, of several hundred miles long. In the Ogallala, the benzene plume would form a plume certainly tens of miles long at concentrations exceeding the safe drinking water levels.
And how do you clean that up?
Well, there could be some debate about this, but basically you don't.
The EPA reviewed the State Department's draft environmental impact statement on July 2010 and gave it the lowest possible rating. The supplemental draft environmental impact statement, reviewed nearly 1 year later, also received a failing grade. Unanswered concerns? Issues were increased greenhouse gas emissions, landowner liability protection, pipeline safety regulations, and pipeline rerouting options.
I think the EPA has done a really great job as far as asking for more protection. I think they've really gotten a wake-up call since there's been 12 spills on the other pipeline, and more pipes are going to follow behind that. And I feel if we don't stop this one, it's not just one little person, it's everybody needs to be involved with it, that there's going to be a lot of sorry people down the road.
Then it's going straight across that way.
This is the area that they're going to go through of mine. This is the hunting habitat that they're destroying.
The pipeline will be running about 300 to maybe 400 yards right straight west of here. Right over here, behind those rocks, is our water well, our domestic water supply. The Ogallala Aquifer and all the surface water flows from that direction, this direction. So if there is a leak in that pipeline, and this is just a real personal thing, one of the first places it would be hit would be our domestic water supply. And so all of my neighbors to the east, and anyone would be involved in that being contaminated. It's not about one man, it's not about me, it's about my neighbors, it's about my state, it's about my country.
We work every day out here to help feed America, and it means nothing to them to come in and let people take our land and use it for what they want. They got a straight route, shorter distance, less expense to them, and they don't care about what they're endangering for anybody else. We're just a risk factor that we're expendable.
Oh, I like being a farmer. I've been a farmer most all my life, and it saddened me to have something like this go through with all the unanswered questions, like what happened if we have an oil leak. It'll run up right down here. I don't know how to handle it.
The thing to understand here is the president has to issue a permit that says that the Keystone XL tar sludge pipeline is in the, quote, national interest. That means you have to look at the environmental impact, that means you have to look at the energy impact, it means you have to look at the economic impact. What they want to do is get this done quickly, because every day that goes by, this pipeline is under more and more scrutiny with more and more people speaking out against it.
The people what they need. Stop the pipeline in the green. The people what they need.
The Obama administration should be doing everything that it can to approve projects expeditiously if they are creating jobs and reducing gasoline prices.
We think that TransCanada is wildly exaggerating the number of jobs that the pipeline could bring. Certainly, it would bring a number of construction jobs around the constructing of the pipeline, but after that, it's not bringing long-term jobs. Clean energy can bring us so many more jobs that are much longer term and much more secure for American people all across the country than ever can be brought by a single tar sands pipeline.
Oil will flow through America to our port refineries. The money is going to flow to Canada. When we're talking over 50 years, $1 trillion will be paying for this oil.
The Canadians themselves, when they were evaluating this project, claimed that the price of oil will go up in the Midwest.
This is all about taking the oil that's coming into the Midwest and moving it down to the Gulf Coast, where they have access to China and other markets. And once they have that access, they can charge a higher price to anyone for all their oil.
We don't know if it's even going to stay here. They may refine it and then ship it out to China or somewhere else. So we're using our country as a way to take this heavy tar sands oil and transport it for the benefit of others.
We're actually significantly increasing our exports from the Gulf Coast. That's what they want to do. Gas prices will go up in 15 states, according to TransCanada's own analysis.
There's an overwhelming consensus among all scientists that climate change is a real problem, and it's to a great extent man-made. And the threat is not a theoretical one, it's already happening now. We're not going to give up on oil overnight. We're not going to give up on coal overnight. But it seems to me that we're not giving the private sector the incentives to develop technology and to use ways that will reduce these emissions and make us a more energy secure nation.
Let's be looking not just at some sort of short-term financial gain for a few people. Let's think about the long-term impacts and the benefits that our resources can provide, because water is a lot more important as a resource than oil is.
I try and think through my head, how am I going to react if it's a yes? How am I going to react if it's a no? How is this country going to take it if it is a yes? You know, and there's so many more things going on in life besides this pipeline. It's hard to get people to stop and think about the possibilities.
Doesn't there have to come a time when we have to preserve what little bit of sanctuaries we have? We have been stewards of the land. That's our job, you know, and when I think what we have accomplished and how in a matter of a few months, a foreign company can come in here and for 110 feet completely decimate this area, I'm just speechless.